There were very intense clashes in Avdiivka last week. The Russian army carried out intensive offensive operations against Ukrainian positions, with the troops gathered in Avdiivka. The main direction of the Russian attacks was in and around Stepove. The Ukrainian army strengthened the defense blocks at this point and applied different defense strategies against the Russian troops on the Stepove line. The attacks of the Russian army in the north and south of Stepove did not bring the expected success. The Ukrainian army managed to destroy a large number of Russian soldiers and equipment in this area. After intense clashes in and around Stepove, the intensity of Russian attacks decreased. As the intensity of the Russian attacks decreased, the Ukrainian army carried out counterattack operations. Russian troops knew that the Ukrainian defense was strong and their attacks could not break the Ukrainian defense line. For this reason, they carried out offensive operations from three sides in and around the Stepove region. The target of the Russian army's attacks was the railway line north of Krasnohorivka. Russian troops managed to reach this area, but Ukrainian defense blocks were also there and met the Russian troops. Intense clashes took place in the area. The offensive of the Russian army slowed down after unsuccessful attacks. The Ukrainian army realized that Russia's offensive operations were slowing down and its strength was weakening. The Ukrainian army concentrated its troops in front of Stepove. They were prepared for a new Russian offensive. However, the Russian army had lost strength after unsuccessful attacks and did not carry out offensive operations. The Ukrainian army, which concentrated its troops just in front of Stepove, attacked the Russian troops. The Ukrainian army attacked the Russians in the area with cluster bombs. The Ukrainian army neutralized the Russian troops in the region. Then they sent kamikaze drones to the region and destroyed the Russian troops, which were open targets. Some Russian troops also fled the area. Ukrainians continued artillery and drone attacks. It increased its firepower in the region and continued its attacks uninterruptedly in order to completely clear the Russians from the region. The Ukrainian army, which opened intense fire on the Russian positions on the railway line, also removed the Russian troops who survived the previous attacks and took control of the region. Russian troops in the forest area and the railway were completely repelled. There were many clashes in the Stepove region. A large number of Russian troops and equipment were destroyed, and as a result, the Russian army could not achieve a victory. The Ukrainian army has established control over the area and continues to strengthen its defense blocks. In this situation, it seems very difficult for the Russian army to maintain control in the Stepove region. However, the Ukrainian army thinks that the Russians will organize a counterattack operation in the region again. Because although the Russians lost a lot of soldiers and equipment in and around Avdiivka, they always continued their offensive operations. The Ukrainian army is strengthening the defense line against possible Russian attacks and preparing additional trenches. The Russians have been organizing offensive operations for about 1 month to repel the Ukrainians in the region and dominate the region. But the Russians have not been able to control the region, despite losing thousands of soldiers and equipment here. The aggressors lost almost 80% of their vehicles, according to the spokesperson for the Unified Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavrisk direction, Alexander Stepove. Today, the enemy attempted to advance. Several mechanized columns with armored vehicles pushed forward. Around 1.5 dozen. However, they lost almost 80% of their vehicles. Our guys destroyed them, Stepove reported. The aggressors don't cease their attempts to encircle Avdiivka. Unsuccessfully, they stormed areas east of Novobakhmutivka in the regions of Avdiivka, Severna and Pervomaiske. 13 attacks were repelled in the past day, the spokesperson added. The Russians increased the intensity of their attacks in the Avdiivka region at the beginning of October. The Russians carried out their most extensive attacks in the Avdiivka region. However, after these attacks, the Russians failed to achieve their goal of encircling Avdiivka. The Ukrainian army inflicted great losses on the Russians, according to Valery Zaluzny, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. During the month when the invaders were concentrated near Avdiivka, Russia lost about 10,000 soldiers on this front. President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia's losses in the Avdiivka area are higher than those near Bakhmut. As military expert Alexander Kovalenko notes, the Russian occupiers near Avdiivka may be focusing on a new tactic because of the enemy's large losses in this direction. Russia comprehends only the language of force. In the last 6 weeks, the enemy has suffered losses of approximately 36,000 soldiers, reports Ukrainian Minister of Defense Rustam Umerov during the opening of the 17th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. In his opening remarks, Umerov asserted that, despite the absence of a formidable fleet, the defense forces have successfully ousted Russian warships from the Black Sea, gradually restoring freedom of navigation. Russia definitely does not plan to stop on its own. The only language Moscow can understand is force, and we have mastered this language well, the minister stated. He emphasized that in the 6 weeks since the last Ramstein format meeting, the enemy has lost nearly 36,000 soldiers. The Ukrainian army's defense performance and strategies in the Avdiivka region are leaving the Russians in the region helpless. It has been conducting offensive operations around Avdiivka since the beginning of October. The intensity of the attacks is much higher than in the Bakhmut region. However, the number of soldiers and equipment lost by the Russian army in offensive operations in Bakhmut, which continued for months, is less than the number of losses in Avdiivka. The Russian army came to Avdiivka to completely occupy the region and wanted to take over the Donetsk region completely by occupying this place, but failed to do so. As it failed, the Russian army suffered incredible damage. Russian leader Vladimir Putin continues to send troops to the region, ignoring the losses in the region. Despite the failed attacks of the Russian army in and around Avdiivka, it is preparing for new offensive operations. Avdiivka has turned into a graveyard of equipment, but the Russians continue to send their equipment back to Avdiivka along with the infantry. There will be intense clashes in the region in the coming days and weeks. The Russian army has lost exactly 320,670 soldiers since the start of the war. The number of soldiers lost by the Russians in the past day is 850. The majority of the losses are in the Avdiivka region. The Ukrainian army, which continues to successfully prevent Russian attacks in Avdiivka, also carries out counterattack operations from time to time by analyzing the situation here well. In this way, it causes the Russian army to lose a lot of soldiers and equipment. However, the Ukrainian army, which continues its counterattack operations in the Kherson region, which it sees as the key to Crimea, is trying to manage these two important fronts. The Ukrainian army, which has increased the intensity of its attacks in the Kherson region, gives a message to Russia with its operations in this region. The Ukrainian army is not only defending, but also fighting for Crimea, which is the main target with counterattack operations. Avdiivka region is a very important point for Donetsk not to be surrounded. For this reason, the Ukrainian army does not want to lose its concentration in Avdiivka. By applying an active defense strategy in the region, it is defeating the Russians on the front line. However, Kherson region is at least as important as Avdiivka. Ukraine is also aware of this, so it continues its operations in the Kherson region cautiously. With a major victory in Kherson, the gates of Crimea can be fully opened to Ukraine. For this reason, Ukraine continues to strengthen its positions in Kherson and attack Russian positions while defending Avdiivka. What do you think about the developments on the Avdiivka and Kherson fronts? Do you think the gates of Crimea will open to Ukraine? Will the Russians recognize that they failed in Avdiivka and stop their attacks?